there are some days that I look at this podcast and I say, wow, there's a lot of work that goes into this. And sometimes I wonder, is it really worth, putting a podcast out, putting episodes out every, 3 times a week and go through the work that I do. And it's like, is it really worth it? Like, is it really helping people? Am I really acting as a resource? And then I have conversations with people, friends of mine, acquaintances and things like that, where they're talking about things that I know aren't true and that need to, and people need to be corrected because some things are not true. And they're talking points that people have. They either get it from TV or they get it from their friends or things like that. And they may not fact check them because they trust their friends, like people would trust me. And then you're kind of like, wait a minute, that's not true. I need to be able to put something out, either saying it back to them and say, hey, this is actually not true. You should look at it this way, or there's benefits in doing this. Or I can go on my podcast and I can talk about it. And I think it's really important to have an established medium, an established platform when you're into science communication, to be able to take something that happened personally to you or even professionally, and to be able to put that out in an episode or in some type of content to be able for people to understand. Because if you're having those conversations with people, I'm sure other people are having those same conversations, and it might affect the way they do business, the way they have their behavior towards the ocean. And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure it's a positive one and it's an accurate one. So we're going to talk about what you can do to establish that platform and to be able, and why it's so important on this episode of How to Protect the Ocean. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another great episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening in the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And today we're going to be talking about speaking up for the ocean. And a lot of you know that when I first started the podcast, my podcast name, before I changed it this January to How to Protect the Ocean, was Speak Up for the Blue or Speak Up for the Ocean Blue. At one point I changed it because oceans mattered in SEO. Now, it's always great to be able to start a platform. And when I started the podcast back in 2015, it's almost 9 years. Actually, by the time I release this episode, it'll probably be 9 years. I was like, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know what it's going to do. But the whole goal of the podcast was to say, I want to be able to change one person's behavior around the ocean so that they can live for a better ocean. That was my goal. One person. And I've been able to do that several times over. And that is, something that's very special to me. That is something that I enjoy. And it's something that, when people say, hey, I really value your podcast, that makes me feel good because I know all the effort that I've put in has been important and has influenced people, whether it's influenced them to live for a better ocean and through, joining and having a career in marine science and conservation, or starting a podcast or starting some sort of content creation because of it, or they see me and they look up and say, hey, you know what, this guy knows what he's doing, or, how maybe I can emulate that, or maybe I can do it a little bit better or a lot better, which is great. We want to, in this space, in science communication, we want to be challenged. We want to make it better every time. And having other people do the same thing that you're doing, maybe in a slightly different way, or feel like look at a different angle, is pretty cool. Is really pretty interesting. So for instance, a good friend of mine, Emily D'Souza, she is a content creator on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube, and so forth. And she's been great. She is in the sustainable seafood space. And she talks about sustainable seafood each and every day online. And she's gotten some brand deals with some aquaculture companies and so forth. And no matter what you feel about who sponsors her or what she's advocating for, she's definitely brought a lot of information to the space that allow people to make better decisions on sustainable seafood. And I think that's really important. She's become that resource, that trusted resource that you can listen to, whether you know her or you don't know the area, or you just want to make better choices around seafood. You can go to Emily and you can ask her questions, or you can listen to her content, and she pretty much answers a lot of the stuff, like the increase in sort of technology and sort of the methodologies in aquaculture, and where you can get sustainable seafood from the wild, and how to support these community-based fisheries and so forth. And I think it's really important to have that. And that's what I feel a lot of people need, because as I mentioned in the pre-intro, I was like, hey, you know what? I was talking to this guy, and it actually bothered me after because I wasn't able to answer him properly because I didn't have the information ahead of me. We were talking about EVs. We were talking. I have a Tesla, and we were talking about Teslas, and him and his friend were basically saying the batteries in electric vehicles right now are not great for the environment when you look at it from a disposal standpoint. And he's like, they're just as good as or gas powered cars are just as good, and that's not true. Because over time, when you look at it over the life of it, the emissions that are caused by a gas-powered car is actually a lot worse because there are no emissions with an electric vehicle. On top of that, as more and more people buy electric vehicles, the technology gets better and the batteries are getting better. It's using less cobalt. The lithium batteries are getting better, and they're working towards getting a better recycled or recycled at all. And so disposal is getting better. And then when you invest more and you see governments investing more because people are investing more into a specific vehicle, like electric vehicle, you're starting to see more renewable energies be, the investment in renewable energies. You see that more. You see an increase in that. And so that's important when you start to see this. But a lot of people don't know that because the overall sort of narrative around when you compare electric vehicles and gas-powered cars sort of to the conversational person is, hey, yeah, that's right. They're just about the same. And here's the thing that makes it dangerous, this type of rhetoric dangerous. I'm not sure people are doing it on purpose. I just think this is what they've been told, this is what they've read, or this is what they believe. And so when you hear that, though, and somebody is, they're speaking to somebody who is on the cusp of, do I go gas powered or do I go electric vehicle? What are the benefits? What are the disadvantages? Is there a benefit or disadvantage? Because I'll be honest, like when I was looking at Tesla, it was easier to choose a gas powered vehicle. For the ones that I was looking at, they were about the same price or even cheaper. I can find gas anywhere I wanted to, and I wasn't sure if I can find charging stations everywhere I wanted to. And so it requires a little bit more planning with EVs, but I wasn't sure how much more. I was very concerned about whether I could charge, whether I can get a full charge wherever I want. I didn't want to break down on the side of a highway on a trip in the middle of nowhere and be worried. And when I got the Tesla, none of that happened. Right? None of that happened. I admit at the beginning I was very concerned, but now there is just so much available where I live in Ontario in terms of charging stations. If I need it, I find that with the long range Tesla, I don't need it because I have like over 570 kilometers in one charge, and so I can go to a lot of different places and not have to worry about getting charged and of where I didn't think I could go in the first place. And if I had been influenced by somebody who was telling me the wrong information, I may not have gone to Tesla or to an electric vehicle. And I'll tell you right now, I'm so happy that I did. I feel so much better about driving. I could drive further places, not have to worry about having as much of an impact as I did in a gas-powered vehicle. But it's also, I really enjoy the car. It's a very nice car to drive. It's a lot of fun. Yes, it is extremely expensive, but I was ready to make that investment, and I had the means to do so. Totally understand that not everybody has those means, but there are a lot of different in electric vehicles out there or hybrids that are quite affordable on every different price point. And so I think that's really important. And we're starting to see more and more electric vehicles, not just Teslas, but more and more electric vehicles on the road. And I enjoy seeing that. And that's going to be important. No matter what government is in charge, no matter what sort of editorial person or columnist or somebody who has a YouTube channel or a show on like Fox News or whatever saying the opposite, there's an increase in electric vehicles, and the technology is getting better, as well as sort of the energy around it that's the electric energy that's using it is getting better. So it's not perfect, but neither is the alternative of gas powered. And I think to have a platform that I have, when I came out of that conversation, instead of regretting the conversation, I did regret it a little bit, but I was able to come out and say, hey, you know what? I could actually talk about it on the show. I could say, hey, I was involved in this conversation, as many people are of my audience. You guys always come in and talk to me about different conversations they had and be like, hey, I wish I had this information, or I wish I had this information. Because we all can't be, including myself or even like the PhDs of the world, can't be knowledgeable in everything at every single point in time and be able to refute or bust myths that are being told to you like right in front of your face, because that's just not how the world works. And so having a platform like this as a podcast becomes comes really handy and makes me feel better, because now I can go and I can talk about these different things, and I can put out accurate information, and I can tell people, like, this is the information. So if anybody ever tells you differently, you know that you have the right information. That's important for me, and I think that's important for a lot of people. As I mentioned in last Wednesday's episode, so that would be 1463. I talked about podcasting, and I feel like other people need to, start a podcast. You who's listening to this and says, you know what, you're right, Andrew, I don't want this information to get out, and I have my own audience, or I can build my own audience that would trust me, as someone who looks up this stuff and can cite references and things like that, to be able to say, hey, I have this platform where people listen anywhere between 15 minutes and an hour. I've had people on where people understand the information, people can take action from that information, and they can live for a better ocean through that information. And the reason why I'm asking you to start a podcast, if you're listening to this and you've always thought about it, is because you have that platform at any point in time. You're not saying, oh, so if I didn't have that platform, or I didn't have a podcast launched and I had that conversation, I'll be like, I should do a podcast, but it's going to take a long time to, one, build up that audience, to gain that trust from people, to get loyal fans and super fans, to say, hey, I actually listened to Andrew. He actually has some really accurate stuff. Sometimes he's very transparent and so forth. And so I want to listen to him. I would have to build all that, and that takes time. So that's why it's important, if you're thinking about launching a podcast, to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to launch this podcast, and I'm going to start now, so that in 6 months from now, when this happens to me, like it did to Andrew, I'm going to have a platform where I can just go back that night, or go back to my office, or go back to wherever you podcast, maybe right then and there, where you listen to this information and be like, I'm going to put this out because this is a topic that people need to see or need to hear. You can even do a video podcast and say, hey, people need to see. That's important. That's why we need to have these platforms. That's, people these days, whether you're young or old, they look up information. So I'm going to say, for instance, I just got back. Here's an example. I just got back from a cottage weekend. It was a guy weekend. There's 4 of us. We went up for Friday, Saturday, and we came back today. I went up Friday night after work. And we were just, it was just a guy's weekend. Had a couple of drinks, talked some stuff, teased each other, played some games, all that kind of stuff. It was a fun time. We had a great time. I really value that time with some friends. And during that time, a lot of times we would say something, somebody would say something like a fact. And then we would be like, is that true? And they're like, I don't know. Let's Google it. And we would Google it, and we would be like, yes, that's true. And this could be a fact on like football or hockey or basketball or any kind of sports. Or, I think at one point we were looking at who would sell out more, who would have the fastest sellout, or who would sell out more concerts in Canada or in Toronto. Would it be like Shakira or the Spice Girls? Yes, that was an actual conversation that we had. Now, just to let you know, we had a few drinks. We drank responsibly, but we had a few drinks. And but these are the conversations that came up. But we would use the internet to sort of fact find and confirm these things, and to answer these questions. And sometimes we had them answered, and sometimes we didn't. But wouldn't it be great if your podcast came up, if somebody asked, well, what are the myths of, EVs or renewable energy or something like that, or something important to you? That is something, like, even the last episode that I did was about marine protected areas and how fisheries aren't affected by large marine protected areas. Well, that's an important thing. So when somebody, looks that question up, my podcast might come up first or second or third or 20th or 54th or 172. I don't know, but my podcast will be there as a resource to answer that question, so that whoever else has that question can be like, oh, we can look at this study that did this, and here are some of the advantages and disadvantages of the studies, what they need to find out more about. And there's always questions around there. And so you can look at that up, and you can look at a study and provide evidence of that sort of fact. Of that fact. And so that's going to, this is what a podcast can do. And this is what a podcast can do for you, is it can provide that platform to be that resource, right? And so that's why I find it so important for you to start a podcast, for you to start, whether it's a video podcast, whether it's a podcast or creating content on TikTok or Instagram in shorter, like a short form version, or it's on a long form version, like a podcast, a video podcast on YouTube, or like a show on Twitch, or like where you live stream or something. This is what you can do. This is a very important aspect of science communication, a very important aspect about conservation. This is why I've dedicated my life to doing this as my career, is to say, I'm going to do science communication because it's important to get to people, to reach people, to answer their questions, to be that resource for people around marine science and conservation. If you don't have a platform like that, it's very difficult for you to be able to convince people. And it also does some stuff for your career. I talked about it on the last episode where I talked about podcasting and sort of content creation. And that was really, it was like 3 episodes ago. And that I found we had a lot of good conversations generated from that, where people are like, I want to launch my podcast. And that's why I think it's important. You need to launch your podcast so that when you come up to this, you can just turn around and release an episode within an hour or 2 or 3 or a couple of days if you want to think about it. But you can do that. It's really easy, but you have to have that podcast launch. You have to have regularly published episodes so that you can grow that audience. And then when it's time that you have to, bust myths, you can do so very, very easily. And so I think that's really important. If you're interested in starting a podcast, if this is kind of inspiring you to do so, you can contact me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. We can put a free consultation, like a half-hour consultation, talk about how I can work with you and so forth of launching that podcast. Or even any kind of content creation. We can discuss what you can do based on time and effort and sort of experience, and see where you go. So all you have to do is just contact me on Instagram, DM me at How to Protect the Ocean. I would love to have the chat with you and see where we can take your podcast to the next level and get you going and get you talking about different resources and becoming that resource for your audience and helping people live for a better ocean. But that's it for today's episode. I'm looking forward to working with you on this. So contact me at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram, at How to Protect the Ocean. And I want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean. And if you don't want to start a podcast, that's fine. I'm not forcing it. This is for people who want to start a podcast. But if you do think that this episode, or someone who wants to start a podcast or likes this kind of stuff, or just likes marine science and conservation in general, share the episode with them. It's really easy to do. And whatever platform you're on, all you do is just click the 3 dots in most places and just say copy link, and then just send it to them. Say, hey, I've got a podcast I think you should listen to. But anyway, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for listening to How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Angelo, and have a great day. I'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.